Harimi, harimi, al tirai, harimi, al tirai. Imri le'arei Yehuda, hinei Elokeichem. Harimi, harimi, al tirai.
You want to learn a little bit about Lag BaOmer first? Talk a little bit about Lag BaOmer, then do the Parsha. Some of this I think I mentioned last year, but it was I thought it was inspirational, what I read. So I wanted to share it again, maybe with a little bit more of a twist. If it's familiar, then you can yell at me. But they say, I think a rabbi they say don't repeat a Dvar Torah. You can say a Dvar Torah once a year, and you can say a story once every 3 years, because usually people forget by then. So.
Depends how good the story's really good.
Right, if it's a good story, you can't really repeat it so often. So you have to like save them for the right time, like the Ne'ilah speech or the Kol Nidre speech. Okay, so actually a little bit of this I talked about Shlomo when he was here about Sfiras Omer. So we have a mitzvah. This is my extra credit question on the test for my students. What mitzvah do we do between Pesach and Chavuz, which is the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer? We count 49 days up from leaving Egypt until Shavuos. What are you saying?
The second night of Passover.
Right, from the second night of Passover. And the reason we do that is because the whole purpose of leaving Egypt, the Ramban writes about this, is to get the Torah. God didn't just save us to liberate us so we could go become successful scientists and doctors and lawyers. He rescued us so that we could get the Torah, to be the chosen people. So the whole purpose, since the whole purpose was getting the Torah, which is on Shavuos, coming up in a few weeks, so we count up to that date, and we make a blessing every night for those 49 days. And during that time, it's a time when we strengthen our Torah study because we're preparing for getting the Torah. So at the end of Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, which is the Mishnayos, which teaches us how to behave ethically, at the end of the Pirkei Avos, the 6th chapter, there's a list of 48 things that are needed to acquire Torah. You would think that Torah is just a wisdom like all other wisdoms, like math, science, English, literature, but it's not. It's a spiritual wisdom, and therefore requires certain attributes to be able to really acquire it. And they're really split up. The Vilna Gaon splits these 48 things into 3 categories. One is study, which is obvious. You have to study in a certain way. Included in that is listening. That if you don't listen, then you can't learn. Shimush Chachamim, serving the sages, so you learn from them, things like that. So that's more of a logical thing. But there's other things. Another group of things is humility. You have to be a humble person to study Torah. It says that you have to learn it with fear. It also says with humility, anava, and things like that. Because if you don't have good character traits, you can never really acquire Torah. You can be a horrible person and be a wonderful math professor, but you can't be a horrible person and be a Torah scholar. The two just don't go together. You don't acquire it as it should be acquired. And the last thing is histapkus b'muat, which means not total negation of the physical, but limiting the physical. For instance, not doing a ton of business, not fulfilling one's pleasures all the time, because obviously if you do that, not only will you not have the time to study Torah, but those are pursuits which are really the opposite of Torah learning. And again, it doesn't say don't do any of these things, it says to limit it, right? The type of person who's looking for every restaurant to try every single food every single night of the week is not the type of person who is going to sit down and be able to study Torah, which is talking about elevated the spiritual. Somebody who's always looking to enhance their physical will not be able to enhance the spiritual. Okay, there's really 48 things. If you want to look, it's in the art scroll after Shabbos Mincha. It lists all these 48 things. And what they used to do is for every night of Sfiras Omer, every day of Sfiras Omer, they used to work on one of these things. And on the last day, the 49th day, they would work on them all, review them all. So today was the 33rd day. So whatever the 33rd thing was is what they were working on.
That's more like the all-night Torah study.
That's Shavuos. That's the 50th night.
That's the 50th.
That's what we're leading up to.
Okay.
But it's really not just Shavuos that we're talking about getting the Torah. The whole period from the second day of Pesach, this time of Sfiras Omer, is a time which traditionally in the Jewish year is spent to strengthen Torah study. So whether it's working on these attributes to acquire Torah, whether it's studying a little more, taking the Torah a little more seriously, that's something we do during this time. So what's Lag BaOmer? It's the 33rd day of the Omer. What's its significance? So if you went around Lakewood or Brooklyn today, you might have seen some bonfires. You would have seen some music. Today we cut our hair and we do things like that. So what is that all about? So first of all, also during the Omer, which is not really associated, well actually it is in a way, but the 49 days counting to Chavuz isn't the only thing that happened. This is when Rabbi Akiva's students also passed away because they weren't noagu kavod zev zeh. They didn't treat each other properly. Since they didn't treat each other properly, it was 24,000 students. They all passed away, and they stopped dying on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. So it's a happy day because they stopped dying.
That's because they're all dead.
What?
That's why they stopped dying, though. They were all dead. There was no more to
Oh,
die.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. Saying why should have?
When the last
No
person
one-
died, there
no
was
one left.
nobody left to die. But was it Rabbi Leiter said that Rabbi Akiva could be considered as a failure because all his students
Oh.
died.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then
Sorry.
tell me. No. What did Rabbi Leiter say?
He said that I don't know. He tried to. He talks. He's very smart, but he was trying to say that because he didn't instruct his students right, that they all died, and that he could be considered an ultimate failure. But then he had some kind of redemption because he had some more students after
Right.
that.
So I want to talk a little bit about that actually.
I got that right. You
Right.
know what that.
So thanks for ruining the class.
Sorry.
Just kidding.
Right, I'm learning.
Okay,
It's
so
not ruined.
no, I'm just teasing. So you had these 24,000 students, and they died. So that's one thing that happened on Lag BaOmer. They stopped dying. So it's also another thing happened is it's the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We'll
Right.
talk a little bit about him. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the one who wrote the Zohar, which is really the source of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and it was received from all the way back the tradition from Moshe, from Hashem, and it was written down originally by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar. Then it was expounded on by the Arizal and others like the Nefesh Chaim, the Vilna Gaon, the Baal HaTanya, the Ramchal, Reb Chaim Vital. But he was really the source, the first writing down of the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism. So that also happened. So this stuff I'm quoting is from Rav Gedalia Shor. I quote him often. He's Rabbi Shor, who was the rabbi at Sons of Israel, his uncle. He was a Yeshiva in Torah Vadas in Brooklyn. So he writes that there are three parts of the Omer. You can really divide it up into three parts. And the last third of the Omer starts on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day. From day 33 to 49 is the last third. And he quotes a Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer was a rabbi who lived in Pressberg in the 1800s. He was one of the first opponents of reform. That's when reform started becoming prominent in Europe, and he was kind of the Orthodox defender, the first Orthodox defender against the reform movement, in addition to being a massive Torah scholar. There might be a book here called The Siege of Pressberg, where he writes he was in
Where's Pittsburgh?
Hungary, Austro-Hungary, what was it then? The Austro-Hungarian Empire. So he was there when the town was sieged by Napoleon, and he writes about all the miracles that happened to saving the Jewish community. And it's a very interesting book, and I'm looking around because I think I've seen it here before. It's a small little book. It was written in Hebrew, but they translated it in English, called The Siege of Pressberg, and it's unbelievable because he's writing it himself. It's like an autobiographical account of what happened, and it's quite unbelievable. But he writes that another event that happened in Lag BaOmer that people don't know about is that's when the manna started falling in the desert. Right, the mystical food that came from the heavens, and that it tasted like whatever you thought about, and it's what sustained the Jews for 40 years. So when the Jews left Egypt, they had some matzah, they had whatever food they had, and the 33rd day after they're leaving, that's when the manna started falling. Now, what's the significance of the manna starting to fall on the 33rd day of the Omer? So he writes that Lag BaOmer, since it's the last third of the Omer, that's when the light of Shavuos starts shining. That's already when we don't have to wait to Shavuos to get to the holiness of Shavuos. The holiness of Shavuos is already starting to shine from today, from the 33rd day of the Omer. And he says the reason is, from Gedalia Shor, because there's a Gemara that says the Torah was only given to the Ochle Haman, which means the Torah was only given to people who eat manna. So what's that mean? It's kind of like what we were talking about before. The Torah is a spiritual knowledge, a spiritual pursuit. And you have to be on a spiritual level, or at least working on yourself spiritually, to get to that point. So manna is a spiritual food. Only somebody who has shaykhis, who has a connection to manna, can really acquire Torah. So the Jewish people entered a holier time period when Shavuz, when the giving of the Torah was really upon them, because they started getting the manna, which was a spiritual food. I believe that they didn't have to how do you say this? Evacuate themselves, if that's the right word. They didn't have to pass. They didn't have any movements in the desert. I believe the manna just got absorbed into their body. It was a holy food, right?
No constipation.
Nothing. Right. Pesach you have, I guess.
At least
Anyway.
constipated.
But and the manna also represents faith in Hashem, because the Jewish people were only allowed to take enough manna for one day. If they took more, it would get rotten. And they had to trust in God every day that tomorrow the manna is going to fall from the sky. And also, the whole Torah, the Vilna Gaon writes, the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah was that we should come to faith in Hashem, faith in God. We should rely on God. So it's another reason, I think, why the manna represents faith in Hashem. Now, it's interesting. So we mentioned, that's one part, that's the Torah. So we're saying that the revelation of the Torah really began on Lag BaOmer, because that's when the manna started falling. And also, we mentioned that as the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai passed away. Now, what's the connection with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai revealed the hidden Torah, revealed the Kabbalah. It was another revelation of the Torah. What's also interesting about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, well, first of all, he's the one who made this statement that the Torah was only given to the people who ate the manna. He's the one who said that statement in the Talmud. Also, do you know the story in the Gemara about him? He was with his son in a cave for 12 years, and miraculously, to hide from the Romans, and miraculously there was a stream that flowed by and a carob tree that Hashem put there to sustain him for those 12 years.
Wow.
So he was considered on the level of someone who eats manna, because he totally depended on Hashem for his food. And since he was on that level, he merited to reveal the hidden Torah, the Kabbalah. So we have on Lag BaOmer the beginning of the revelation of the Torah, and the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who revealed the hidden Torah, revealed the Kabbalah, because he was an eater of manna. Okay, so then I want to tie into what you were saying before from Rabbi Leiter. Rav Gedalia Shor writes that, he says, even, some people, you get to Sfira, and it's already day 33, you said, I just learned today I'm supposed to be, improving my Torah study and thinking more about Torah study, and I wasted the time, right? Many people do this, or if you didn't know about it, or you weren't working about it, you're busy. It's like, what's the point? So he writes that there's still a third left, and he says you don't give up, you never give up. And where do we learn that from? Rabbi Akiva, like you're mentioning before, he lost 24,000 students. Can you imagine? 24,000 students. That's a stadium full of students. So he could have given up, like you said. He could have felt like a failure, that he did something wrong. He should, whatever, just pack up, get another job.
Give up and leave. Yeah.
But he didn't do that. What he did is he got 5 students, and he started all over again. And from those 5 students is the entire Talmud that we have today. Everything that we have from those 5 students. And one of those 5 students was Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who revealed the Kabbalah. So it just shows you, I can't even imagine. You always hear like, oh, his students died, so we don't shave, and you don't really sit home. Like, what does it mean to lose 24,000 students, right?
You can't keep up with all the funerals.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's insane. But he's such a person. You can imagine so many people, who went through the Holocaust. You have all these rebbes that went through the Holocaust, and they came to America. They lost their entire families, and they started over. They rebuilt what they lost in Europe. People like that is who we should emulate. We shouldn't never give up. We always keep on trying. That's the difference between a tzaddik and everyone else. A righteous person. It says a tzaddik falls 7 times and he gets up. People think, especially if you read certain biographies, that a tzaddik means that the person was perfect. He never did anything wrong. He just was born knowing the whole Torah, was a genius or whatever, never had any struggles. But that's not true. Tzaddikim also fail. They're human beings. Human beings fail. But the difference between a tzaddik and everybody else is that he gets up and he tries again. He could fall 7 times, but he keeps trying. So the lesson also from Lag BaOmer, even if you didn't work on studying Torah the first 2/3 of Sfira, you don't give up and you keep on going. Okay, that's what I want to say on Lag BaOmer. Talk a little bit about the parsha. Good? Okay. So, the beginning of the parsha, we have Shemitah. That's page 696. If you want to follow along, we have Shemitah. Every 7 years, we let the land lay fallow. This year is a Shemitah year. No harvesting, farming, nothing like that. And the land has to rest. And it's a very serious mitzvah. The Ramban points out that the penalty for not keeping Shemitah is more severe than other negative prohibitions in the Torah. And he writes, very strong wording here, he says, anyone who rejects Shemitah, he rejects the fact that God created the world and the world to come. The idea is Shemitah is like Shabbos. Shabbos, every seventh day, we rest. We show that God created the world and He rested on the seventh day. Shemitah is a similar thing. It's also a cycle of 7. For 6 years, we work the land. On the 7th year, we stop working the land to show that God created the world and He rested. So someone who doesn't keep it is similar to someone who rejects Shabbos. Can you ask me a chumash, please? Sorry. Thanks. Thank you. And also, the whole idea of Shemitah is, did I write where this pasuk is? If you look at page 700, the second verse on the page, Chaf, verse 20, this really encapsulates what the idea of Shemitah is. If you say, what are we going to eat in the 7th year? We didn't plant it, we didn't collect as to us our crops. I will put my blessing on the year in the sixth year, that you'll have enough produce for 3 years. The Torah promises that if you keep Shemitah, you'll have a blessing in the 6th year, so you'll have enough for the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. Because you didn't plant in the 7th, so you're not going to have for the 8th. The whole idea is, again, what we were discussing before of the manna, trusting in Hashem, trusting in God, that I'm not going to put in my energies, and I recognize that it's not through my own power that I sustain myself, but it's rather through Hashem. And again, Rav Gedalia Shor says, who I quoted earlier, that the faith that the farmer has in the 7th year when he's not planting and he's not harvesting, that should make him realize that not only is his sustenance coming from Hashem in the 7th year, but it's also coming from Hashem in years 1 to 6, when he is putting in the effort. Right? That becomes very hard. Right? If miraculously you see all the crops come, that's okay, wow, I trust in Hashem, that's amazing. But when I'm also putting in the effort, that's when it gets a little tricky, because we think, I do it, Hashem didn't do it, I did it. I'm a skilled farmer. I know what I'm doing, I know about different soils and different harvesting techniques. But no, we have to recognize that even when we're actually doing it ourselves, that Hashem is the one who is in charge. And that's what the idea that we were talking about before of the manna and having faith in Hashem. Okay, so Rav Ruderman, who is my Rosh Shiva's Rosh Shiva, points out on page, as an aside, I think they say this in some of the discovery seminars that Rabbi Vishnevsky used to take us to, that if you were making up a religion and you wanted to falsify a religious creed and a religious book and get people to follow your religion, and you made this statement that if you don't farm in the 7th year, I promise you'll have a lot of crops in the 6th year to keep you for the 6th, 7th, and 8th year. He says your religion would last for about 6 years. Because if you got to the 6th year and it wasn't true and there weren't a lot of crops, people would leave. Faker. So to make this kind of promise in a book testifies to the veracity that it was actually written by Hashem. That it was written by Hashem. I thought that was a powerful point.
Do we have to let the slaves go too?
That's in the 50th year. That's
Jubilee.
Yeah, Jubilee.
50 years the slaves had to serve?
Yeah, they got it from the Liberty Bell. Proclaim liberty throughout the land and all the inhabitants therein. It's in this week's parsha, I think, somewhere. They grow some drawer. Where is it? Yeah.
But the slaves.
Verse Yud is the Liberty Bell. Ukrosim Jor Ba'aretz L'chol Yoshveh, proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all its inhabitants.
What do the slaves do during the Jubilee year, though?
They go, they're done, they're free.
Oh, they are free.
Free men.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I was mentioning something Rabbi Ruderman said. If you look, what is this? 2514, which is on page 698. What's the mitzvah right after Shemitah? It says, V'chi simkaru, verse Yudalad, V'chi simkaru mimkar la misacha, when you sell something, kona miyana misacha, or you buy something from your people, al tanu ish esachiv, don't oppress him, don't oppress your brother. That's talking, what does it mean oppress? What's ona? That means overcharging somebody. You're not allowed to overcharge somebody. Right? If it's more than a 6, you have to return it. The sale is not even valid. So there's a mitzvah not to overcharge somebody. And that's the mitzvah that's given right after Shemitah. So what is the connection between the mitzvah not to overcharge somebody and the mitzvah of Shemitah? So it's the same point we've been talking about all night, Rav Ruderman says. A person who has faith in Hashem, which is expressed by the mitzvah of Shemitah, because he knows that he doesn't have to work the land, Hashem's going to provide him with his sustenance. He doesn't have to overcharge somebody. Only someone who doesn't trust Hashem has to cheat in business, to cut the corners, to get a little more, to get a little extra because he needs all the money. Someone who trusts in Hashem, I don't need to overcharge you. I charge you a fair price because I trust that really my efforts aren't the reason that I am getting my sustenance, my parnasa. It's from Hashem, so there's no need for me to overcharge. Now, I just want to finish with one more mitzvah in the parsha, later on the page. It says, there's another term, someone actually asked a question on this, which I hope to share. But, Yud Zayin, 17, a few verses down. It says, V'losanu ish esamiso, a person should not oppress someone. V'yareisem elokecha, and fear Hashem. Ki ani Hashem elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. So what does it mean not to oppress somebody? So let's look in the oral Torah, because as always the oral Torah explains what the written Torah has to say. So the Mishnah says in Bava Metzia 58b, Kishem she'ona b'mekach u'memkar, just like there's a mitzvah not to oppress somebody in a sale, meaning overcharging him. Kach ona b'dvarim, there's also a mitzvah not to oppress somebody with words. There's a negative prohibition. How do you oppress someone with words? Lo yamer lo b'kama chayvet zeh v'hu ein rotza likach. Don't go into a store and ask somebody how much is this item, and you have no intention of purchasing it. It's a sin to do that. If you just go to a store and you don't have money on you, no intention of buying anything, you're oppressing. You're going to make the person get all hopeful that he's going to make a sale, and you have no intention of doing it. There's actually a negative prohibition in the Torah. Now, it doesn't mean you have to actually, sometimes if you have money on you, they want you to go in the store because maybe you'll think to buy something. There's a possibility you might buy something, you can go in. But you have zero possibility of buying something, can't do it. Im hayabal tshuva, let's say someone's about tshuva, meaning he used to be a sinner, and now he doesn't do sins anymore. Lo yamar lo zocher ma'asech harishonim. You can't say to him, remember when you used to eat at McDonald's and do all these sins? Now people like to do that because it makes them feel better about themselves.
Because they're sinning themselves.
What?
Because they're committing sins themselves. So
yeah, that too.
Like
right.
Join the club.
All right. It says imhu ben gerim. Let's say someone's the son of converts. Lo yomer lo zocher ma'aseh v'secha. You can't tell him, remember what your parents, your ancestors used to do. That's what the Gemara says. Now, one second, let me just see. That's the Mishnah. Gemara says, right? Don't say let's say somebody who came to learn Torah and he used to not be religious. Don't tell him that a mouth that ate non-kosher now wants to say the words of Hashem. Things like that. If somebody has has bad luck and there's a lot of trials and tribulations in his life, don't tell him, someone who's free of sin, all this bad stuff wouldn't happen to him. All right,
That's mean.
Yeah, so these are very mean, but there's also sometimes less obvious things. Sometimes we joke around with each other. I might have even done it at the beginning of this year. But and sometimes people take it a little seriously, so it's always good to keep in mind if it's the type of person that can take it, or maybe it's better not to do it at all. Instead of ribbing someone to saying a nice word.
You never know who's sensitive.
Yeah, some people are very sensitive. Sometimes you say something as a joke, and people really take it very, very seriously. Rav Yitzhak Shiner, who was a big Rosh Yeshiva, recently passed away. He came to Ner Yisrael when I was there to speak. He spoke about two things. one of the things he spoke about was the power of a nice word. So you see someone who's sad, depressed, and you say something nice to them. You don't know how it could totally change their day, their week, their month, their year. You never know what it could do. It's so powerful. The Torah here is telling us how damaging it could be to say something mean to somebody. It's a negative prohibition, just like everything else. But how powerful, also, on the opposite, how a nice word could be to somebody. Just even there's a mitzvah to say hi to people, smile. Right? It makes a big difference. Telling myself sometimes we're all, and speaking to myself especially, we're all so busy and distracted by our own lives, we don't think to say hello. You never know, a guy could have woke up very depressed, and you say hi to him, and it just brightens his day, changes his whole day. It's a big mitzvah, makes someone happy. Wow. Okay. Also, the verse says, I wanted to mention from Rashi, it says, V'yareisem elokecha, and you fear Hashem. You have to fear Hashem. Why does it mention specifically that at the end of the verse about oppressing someone with words? Because, you're asking, the example we had before, going into a store and asking somebody, how much is this? And you don't plan to buy it. So fear Hashem, because Hashem knows what's in your heart. Maybe the guy doesn't know if you didn't plan to buy it, but God knows what was in your heart. So you can't get anything past him. So that's that. Oh, and then I have a friend. I don't have an answer for this. My friend wanted to know why specifically the same word in Hebrew is used for oppressing someone with money and oppressing someone with words. Why is it called ona? That's when you overcharge somebody. And onas dvarm is when you say something hurtful. So he just made that. I thought that was an interesting question. If anyone has suggestions. But it was a lot about Lag BaOmer. We talked a lot about Bitachon, faith in Hashem. And we saw that in Shemitah also, and not oppressing people with money. And we talked about Onos Dvarm. So and it's the beginning of the end until Shavuos. Now's the time to start learning an extra 2 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, working on check out these 48 things in the Art Scroll Siddur. It's right after Shabbos Mincha. It's very interesting, and you can see the commentary of why these things specifically are needed to acquire Torah. Even this says discussing things with friends, not doing a lot of business, a little sleep, a little talking. He's not supposed to be a blabbermouth, I guess. A good heart, believing the sages, accepting difficulty. It's very interesting. To become a Torah scholar, it's not just an intellectual exercise. It has to be accompanied by a whole spiritual uplift.
How many years did it take for you to become a rabbi?